Hello and welcome to Newsfire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now today, 5th of February, is being observed across the world as Kashmir Day. It is in observance of Pakistan's support and unity with the people of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It's also observed to pay homage to those Kashmiris who have died in this conflict. Now, August 5th, 2019, the BJP-led government of India, they revoked Article 370, an article that had essentially given the Muslim-majority state somewhat autonomy there. Now, fearing the worst kind of backlash from inside and outside India, what the government decided was a complete lockdown and a blackout of the entire region. I'm talking about Jammu and Kashmir here. Now, media representatives, they were removed. Access to the internet, telephone lines was cut off, and basic rights were suspended in the name of reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir. Even the chief ministers in former governments were put under house arrest. In fact, the entire political leadership there is currently still detained. 8 million Kashmiris have been living these past 6 months in an atmosphere of fear and trepidation. As a result of this volatile condition created by the BJP government, schools, colleges, they've seen little to no attendance at the expense of youth's education. Businesses, shops, all have been affected. Billions of dollars have been lost from this precious economy of the besieged valley. Now, these frequent cordon search operations you hear about from media that does trickle through have injured hundreds. By some accounts, 14,000 have been detained under the controversial Public Safety Act. The United Nations Security Council has also convened 2 closed-door meetings in these past 6 months to better understand the situation, so to offer remedial steps. This in itself is a bit unprecedented. Until now, there had been absolutely no meeting convened on Kashmir by the UNSC in nearly half a century. Meanwhile, India is continuing to subjugate Muslims within its borders with the Citizenship Amendment Act. This has provoked protests by civilians from every background in religion within India. Despite the concerns from the international community, despite the concerns from the UN, many foreign governments, the right-wing Hindutva-inspired government remains unfazed in pursuing its one-point agenda, that is making India free of Muslims. So in light of Kashmir Solidarity Day, we will be speaking to our analysts to get their views how far the plight of Kashmiris has come in these past 72 years since the beginning of the Kashmir conflict, and where does it stand today in the priority list of the international community that is supposedly working to bring peace and stability in the world today. Let me introduce who we're speaking to. We have with us Mr. Rafiq Kathwari, a Kashmiri activist and the recipient of a prestigious Patrick Kavanagh Poetry Award. He's right now in San Fernando in Chile. And we have also Ms. Nayeema Mahjoor, a Kashmiri journalist, and she is right now speaking to us from London. Welcome to both of you to this conversation. Mr. Rafiq Kathwari, I'd like to begin with you with the essential question in terms of since 5th of August 2019, since the revocation of Article 370, where does the Kashmir conflict stand in the eyes of the World Forum?
Where does it stand? I mean, your Prime Minister made a fantastic speech. I was listening to part of it. And what we are concerned about is, as Kashmiris, is the colonial settler project that India has in mind, that one of their diplomats has publicly declared. And my fear is that after this winter, in April, that they will send all these Nikkarwalas, the Neanderthals of Nagpur, into Srinagar, into the valley, and they'll start creating havoc. So that's my major concern. Already in the month of January, about 22 people have been killed, 22 young men have been martyred, as they say. So this is our concern. Now, in terms of where it stands internationally, well, I'm kind of disappointed with the Muslim countries, excepting for Malaysia and Turkey. None of the defenders of the faith, I call them the offenders of the faith, have come out publicly, strongly condemning India. And so where is one of the most strongest voices that could help this? Now, some noises are being made in the Gulf, so I think that answers part of your question. My concern is the upcoming extermination which is already happening, but the colonial settler project, just as what you are seeing in real time in Israel. So this is my concern. This is a concern of my relatives in Srinagar, where children have been denied an education. Is a mess. Education is a mess. People are being detained. People are being by the army. If they see a VPN on their phone, the phones are being are being taken away, and so on and so forth. So this is
Mr. Kathwari, you talk about the kind, not just the demographic change that is right now underway in Jammu and Kashmir, but also, of course, the kind of backlash it will see, the Indian government will see. There are 368 people who were reportedly killed in Kashmir just in 2019. But keeping all of this in mind, has the international community, has the UN failed to act against this aggression of the Indian government, which is, it seems, almost exposed itself, what with the CAA and the kind of protests it's provoked within its borders?
I don't think it's right to say that the UN has failed. The UN has its own energy. It works in its own bureaucratic cycle. I'm grateful, or most Kashmiris I know are grateful for the two meetings that you referred to earlier, closed-door meetings at the United Nations. Even though I'm in Chile at the moment doing some literary work here, I know that the diaspora in the United States is very active. It has woken up finally, and we are organizing, and we are trying to keep the issue on the front pages to the extent that we can. But as you know, there are other contingencies always. So Kashmir traditionally has been on the periphery of the Western mind, especially the American mind. So we have to really work harder. But again, my concern is the oncoming onslaught, the settler colonial project. It's going
settler
to
colonial project will get hand and create a lot of problems there. Thank you so much, Mr. Rafiq Kathwari, joining us. Ms. Nayeema, Mahjoor, just on this strand of thought here, on the settler colonial project he talks about, the kind of demographic change happening here in Jammu and Kashmir as the lockdown continues. And the question of that, is the Kashmir conflict now at the periphery of the world's conscience? What is your take on it?
I think I partly disagree with Mr. Kathwari. I have seen for the last 5-6 months, there have been a lot of meetings going on in the back channels which are working for a Kashmir dispute. I have seen some activities in UK and US also. Even you spoke about UN General Council, and they've been meeting, US Congress has been meeting. Lot is going behind the corridor, but I think there is a lack of diplomacy. There is a lack of lobbying from our side, from Kashmir diaspora. I think partly we are also responsible for not doing much, and international community is also a little bit responsible because it doesn't see much of efforts from our side so that it can take really interest to resolve this issue.
Would it take the kind of lobbying you're talking about for the World Forum to effectively take some kind of action besides the kind of condemnation that comes from just words spoken or statements given by world leaders, considering it is in the world media right now what is unfolding by the day, whether it's the CAA itself, or whether it is the kind of atrocities meted out to protesters in Delhi and Shaheen Bagh. I mean, media has represented it in different articles, like The Economist came out with the front page report on intolerable India. Do you think that is, again, not hitting the nerves of the World Forum?
No, I think the way international community has responded to CAA in India or the NRC in India, it has not reacted to Kashmir problem, because every time we see there is a human rights violations for the last 7 decades, violations are there, and so much has been done for the last 6 months now. It's 6 months today. When Kashmir is locked down, there's a communication blockade, leaders are arrested, and there is a leadership vacuum as well. Nobody is there to talk to people, what people can do. And there's a lot of suffocation, there's a numbness among people. They don't talk because if they talk, they know that they will be apprehended, they will be put behind bars, and then their relatives might not be knowing where they have been sent to jail. So I think the international community is very much concerned about the CIA in India. Regarding Kashmir, I haven't seen so much seriousness. But as I said, there needs to be a lot of diplomacy to be done by both Pakistan and by Kashmiri diaspora. And the way we have been active in the earlier, in August, it has little bit died down. So I think we also have to take little bit of more.
More action, you're saying, more action, more diplomacy needs to be done up by not just the Kashmiri diaspora, but Pakistan as well. But let's talk a little about what kind of reports are coming out from Watchdog, human rights reports coming out on the kind of torture techniques the government troops within Jammu and Kashmir is resorting to, reports talking about citizens being beaten, stripped naked, and teenagers having their lips sewn up. In fact, the police admitted itself that at least 144 children had been detained since 5th of August for just speaking up against the government, for protesting. We're talking about minors here. Tell us a little about the fears you have in terms of backlash from the community when finally this curfew and lockdown is removed.
Look, Ayza, everybody is saying why people of Kashmir are not on roads protesting. 1 million security forces are on roads, and we know the moment people will come out and protest on the roads, there will be so many massacres, which we have already seen in the early 90s. So this time, Kashmiris have behaved maturely. They haven't come on the roads, but that doesn't mean that Kashmiris are not protesting. They are protesting silently, gracefully, and peacefully. They are not happy with this decision, and because this was a big shock to them, and they are still under the shock. But they are protesting. There have been so many protests. There is a lockdown. The journalists are not able to give stories, file stories. And the journalists from India have been in Kashmir with the satellite phones, and whatever government narrative is there, they are just feeding that to their channels. That's why we don't get so many stories from Kashmir, the real stories, what's happening on the ground. I think the backlash which you are talking is that this time also, count it in terms of that thousands of people will come on road. But I can tell you with authority that 8 million people are outrageous, are angry, and are protesting silently and gracefully against this decision.
There's absolutely no doubt there, Mahjoor, that the 8 million who have been living in extreme curfew and lockdown will be suffering and be protesting as a result of this. Well, thank you so much for giving us your time there and speaking to us. Let me welcome Mr. Hassan Akbar. He's the Director of Strategic Security in Jinnah Institute and an expert at foreign policy. He's joining us today from Islamabad. Welcome, Mr. Akbar. The conversation has largely been pegged on that Pakistan and the Kashmiri diaspora needs to do more in terms of bringing the kind of attention that the Kashmir conflict needs. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's largely true. I think this is a long struggle. Pakistan must have, and the Kashmiris must have a long prism on the struggle ahead. They've been struggling for several decades now, particularly since the early 90s. And now, it is a long haul for Kashmiris and for Pakistan, especially because India believes that it has been able to convince the Kashmiris and has been able to win in Kashmir through its actions in August 5th. But as your speaker before was saying, I also agreed that while Kashmiris might not be on the streets protesting because of the severe lockdown and the extremely high number of troops that are now, and paramilitary troops that are now positioned inside the valley, I think the large majority of Kashmir today is alienated from New Delhi and from India. I think there's no doubt about that. And as the snow melts, as the restrictions ease, we will see more and more outbursts of anger and protests from the Kashmiris. I think what Kashmir the message that Kashmir has sent is that, there is no future with India for Kashmiris, especially in the valley. I think that much is very clear. From Pakistan's end, I think Pakistan has had a powerful diplomatic, forward-looking approach so far. But let's be honest, India has very large economic, diplomatic, and political clout in the world, and it has brought that to bear to be able to restrain the pressure that international community can place on India. Pakistan has been able to raise its...
I just want to stop you there for a second. It's a good point, because the commercial is something that just today Prime Minister Khan in Azad Kashmir, gave a speech where he talked about this, that while Pakistan had put forward this narrative, its diplomatic stance on Jammu and Kashmir, whether it's in the UN General Assembly or speaking to world leaders on important sort of international events, the question really is that how long can that conversation move forward in penetrating their conscience when the commercial interests are the priority here?
I think that's a question for Pakistan to very deeply think about, especially because, the international conversation has largely been taken over about India on issues like CAA and Citizenship Act. Mm-hmm. And it has pushed Kashmir somewhat to the back burner. And that's a process of the news cycle that we have to deal with. So for Pakistan, it's very important to keep pushing its points on Kashmir, keep raising the human rights abuses in Kashmir and the disputed nature of Kashmir abroad. I think it's also very important that Pakistan should realize that it is a very large country and a strong country, and must act with confidence in retaliation to India's actions on August 5th. And I think we've seen a little bit of that, but I hope that we can see more of that. Now, and for that, I think Pakistan needs...
Now, just one point here. Prime Minister also said here that while the commercial interest did outweigh the kind of conscience we needed to garner, the kind of support we need to garner from the World Forum on Kashmir, he talked about something that he said might, understanding the West, as he said, understanding the West and their mentality and their psychology, the fact that the Indian government, with its new aggressive laws, subjugating Muslims within its borders, subjugating Muslims in Kashmir, it borders on the sort of, it reflects, mirrors the Nazi stance that we saw in Hitler's time, in the kind of extreme right-wing, super-nationalistic approach, which really touches the nerve with the West. Now, when Prime Minister Khan talked about this, that this might be what really gets their attention and gets them moving, do you agree with that approach?
I think that it's a good approach in the sense that, it's important to highlight the fascist nature of the government in New Delhi. And it has resulted in some resonance, particularly with parliamentarians in the European Union, the UK, and the USA. But to be honest, I mean, if we expect governments abroad to react strongly to India's actions in Kashmir, I think this narrative is good for public consumption. It's good about creating a new narrative on the reality of what India has become today. But Ayza, I do think that there are limitations to this narrative when it comes to government action at the international level or multilateral action at multilateral forums like the United Nations. So far, what we've seen is that India has been able to, mobilize countries like France, the United States and others to contain the pressure on Kashmir. Only recently, it's been able to take the US ambassador in New Delhi to Kashmir on a very controlled visit. And the US has not been applying the kind of pressure that it should be applying on New Delhi. So what Pakistan needs to do is Pakistan needs to up the game, in my view. I think Pakistan needs to...
How does Pakistan up the game?
Need to up the game by emphasizing how important Kashmir is to Pakistan at every single forum. Pakistan, including the OIC, we did not support the countries that supported us on the Kashmir cause by not going to the Malaysia summit. We should not have done that, in my opinion. I think Pakistan, despite our restraints, need to make clear to our partners and our close countries in the OIC, especially the Gulf countries, that they need to come out at the OIC platform and take a statement out on Kashmir. And if not, Pakistan needs to reconsider its relationship with an organization like OIC that has not been able to support one of its founding members on an issue that is so intrinsic to its survival in the long run. Secondly, I think Pakistan needs to raise, we have not been raising enough about the LOC violations that India has been continuously taking part in over the last 4 to 5 months. Several civilians have died and have been injured. Soldiers have died. Civilian infrastructure and homes have been hit. Children have been injured. This is a serious security threat. Even in the last week, we have seen a rise in ceasefire violations once again after a small spat. And as the winter, period, goes away, so that you need to.
So, Mr. Hassan Akbar, thank you so much. And on the LOC, I should mention here again, in the past 24 hours, Pakistan had summoned a senior diplomat from the Indian High Commission to register a protest on the violation of the LOC with the kind of cross-firing that has taken place by Indian forces, as a result injuring several women and a child also in this side of the border. Now, with that, these incidents have taken place several times where Pakistan has registered these protests. But anyhow, let's move forward. Let me welcome another guest to this conversation. We have with us Air Vice Marshal Mr. Shahzad Chaudhry, joining us from Islamabad as an analyst. Welcome to the show, Mr. Chaudhry. What is your opinion on the times? Are they changing for Kashmir? Is the world waking up to the cause of Kashmir?
Well, we'll have to keep reminding the world so that Kashmir stays in the conscience of the global community. It has been lying buried under numerous interests of the global community for a long, long time. I think in the last year and a half, Pakistan has done well. Ever since, in fact, Modi made the biggest mistake, strategic mistake of annulling the Article 370 in its constitution, which assured the special status of the Kashmiris and therefore established their right to what the Security Council resolutions had actually ordained for them in terms of deciding their own future. So when he made that mistake, the world then woke up to it. Pakistan has just simply carried that message. Remember also the fact that in the last 15 to 20 years, the Kashmiris have written their own saga in blood in terms of their struggle for freedom. Freedom from the occupation of the Indian army and the military that continues to dominate the Kashmiris and the Kashmir Valley, almost to the ratio of a million military, paramilitaries and the police against only 8 million Kashmiris in that valley. So therefore, that story is already there. That story needs to be retold to people. I think we've done well. The global community obviously is now waking up to it. The Security Council in the United Nations has considered the topic of Kashmir, discussing it twice in the last year or so. The world capitals are talking about it. There have been resolutions passed and tabled in the House of Representatives in the United States. Pakistan could double up the entire effort just to make sure that the important capitals like Bonn, London, perhaps Paris, otherwise Moscow and China must continue to be sensitized to the plight of the Kashmiris. And that is our job, and that is why we really dedicate ourselves to this assignment and this task for the Pakistanis, standing with our brothers in Kashmir.
You talk about Pakistan needing to double its efforts so that the world's capitals continue to be sensitized to the plight of Kashmiris. But do you think that Pakistan's diplomatic stance since the start now stands verified and proven before international law, the statutes of liberty, freedom and human rights?
Look, you have to have a combination of all these avenues. It has to be diplomatic, legal, and diplomatic, legal combined together, because that is what makes the statutes, which have been considered by the collective conscience of the world at large in terms of the Security Council resolutions. So that has to be reminded and brought to the table again and again. Something else has also happened, and that is the dilution of the Simla Agreement. Simla Agreement was, in my terms and in my understanding, has been diluted when Modi went along singularly on his own and annulled the Article 370 in its own constitution, which established the special place for the Kashmiris as a people that need to be treated differently away from the Indian Union. So when he did that, So therefore, there is more space now for Pakistan to take this matter away from the binds of Simla Agreement, which had actually almost bound us in bilateral treatment of this issue. So we are now free. Pakistan is more free to go and take this issue forward. Kashmiris continue to be at this moment incarcerated. I think it's the 185th or the 186th day. So it's by the time the Indians or the Kashmiris find a way to sort of move out of this incarceration, when they're a little more free to express themselves, I feel that sort of a movement or that sort of a reaction or a sentiment associated along with or conflated with what the legal, political, diplomatic efforts continue to on the Pakistani side and the Kashmir diaspora at large, I think will add up to the pressure where the global conscience can then become even more sensitized to the plight of the Kashmiris and do something as a solution for their future.
You said Prime Minister Modi's biggest mistake was the revocation of Article 370. Has the Indian government exposed its Hindutva agenda and hatred of Islam by the kind of aggressive legislation not only aimed at Kashmiris but also all Muslims across India?
That's an interesting, development in the sense that the Indians themselves, and it's not the Indian Muslims alone, Indians, those who believe in liberal thought, those who believe in the secular construct of the Constitution and their lives and freedoms as have been given to them in their own Constitution, have stood up to the Hindutva or the fascist thought or ideology of the BJP, RSS and Modi, which of course Modi now leads. So in that sense, there is a reaction within India. And when you put it together with when the reaction takes its fullest force in Kashmir, I think India will have a lot to answer for, a lot to handle. And therefore, the piecemeal treatment that they are currently giving to what is happening in its different cities in terms of this Citizens Amendment Bill, as well as the NRC. So therefore, that, along with what might emerge in Kashmir, will become a handful for them. That is also the time for Pakistan to pick up its diplomatic effort in the world capitals and perhaps go back to the United Nations and sensitize. There's so much documentation that has come out in the last few months in terms of the excesses that are taking place. And
in your opinion, has the international community and the UN failed to act against Indian aggression as is required under international law?
There are a couple of clauses or some clauses within the resolutions that have been passed on Kashmir and this dispute by the United Nations, which bind both India and Pakistan to a certain code of conduct. And that perhaps acts as a stumbling block on both sides and especially gives an escape to those who do not want a resolution of the Kashmir issue at all. The paradigm of Kashmir or the issue of Kashmir has also changed considerably. If we want to treat the future of Kashmir along the resolutions that have been passed by the Security Council, to which we are still sticking as a legal sort of strength in our case, I think there could be a possibility of looking at Kashmir anew in terms of how Kashmiris and their aspirations have evolved, how things have changed, and in that sense, therefore, the possibility of finding an alternate solution to Kashmir. There was something talked of the 4-point formula during Musharraf's regime, but then that died, of course. And the space for it to renew on the same lines is not there any longer. But I think whenever we have a little more responsive government in India, it could be a little longer in coming. It could be another 3-4 years. But we need to continue to work towards creating more solutions, more possibilities and more options and more possibilities of various opportunities in Kashmir. Maybe there's a possibility to give it some sort of an autonomy as a state, while keeping India and Pakistan both responsible for perhaps taking care of the security aspects of it. Maybe the United Nations steps in and provides it the necessary security.
So work has to continue on trying to resolve
that sort of innovative thinking will need to continue in looking at Kashmir.
Thank you so much, Air Vice Marshal Shahzad Chaudhry joining us from Islamabad. And with that, we'll take a quick short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now, a meeting took place between Sudanese leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday. Now, this has triggered a whole wide range of reactions both internationally and within Sudan itself. It is an unusual and unprecedented high-level meeting between Sudan and Israel, considering there have been little to no official diplomatic ties with Israel between the two nations, especially since Sudan's independence in 1956. So this high-level meeting, it's considered to be a first of its kind between the two, and it's also coming at a time when President Trump has just revealed his what he calls the deal of the century, a plan for Israel and Palestine. Now, Palestine has reacted very strongly to this meeting between Israel and Sudan, saying that this in itself is a stab in the back for the Palestinian cause. Now, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan says he's had this meeting to forward Sudanese interest. So, as Sudan has struggled to move forward nearly a year after an uprising that toppled the regime, the 30-year-old regime of Omar al-Bashir, we're really looking to question here with our analysts, was this meeting more about practical economic considerations, or was this essentially the kind of diplomatic shift we should expect now happening within Sudan? Let's find out. First of all, we would be speaking to Mr. Gideon Levy, a journalist joining us from Tel Aviv. Welcome, Mr. Levy, to Newswire. Tell us your thoughts on why did this meeting take place? What do you gather between the lines with the Sudanese General Burhan meeting with the Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I wouldn't overestimate this meeting. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, is now in an endless campaign, quite a desperate campaign, and he's traveling from capital to capital in order to gain some kind of achievements. Part of them are totally hollow, part of them have some meaning, but by the end of the day, as Henry Kissinger stated it once, Israel has no foreign policy, Israel has only domestic policy, and it is all about impressing the base, impressing the voters, and convincing them that this magician has no substitute and you have to vote for him. In the same time, I don't want to say it's totally meaningless, because still Sudan is a Muslim country, an Arab country, and the meeting was an open meeting, and it has some kind of meaning in terms of international atmosphere.
Now, you talk about that Prime Minister Netanyahu is right now campaigning endlessly. Of course, it's unprecedented that Israel is itself looking at the third snap elections within a year. And as elections draw close for the third time, we're seeing efforts not just limited to Sudan, but also in terms of other African nations. What is he hoping to obtain here other than just, campaign achievements?
Look, Israel knows very well that its future will be decided, among other things, also by the international community. With Western Europe, things are going a little harder. So Israel is trying to gain as much as possible sympathy and also diplomatic achievements with the third world. The friendship with the Indian Prime Minister is one example. Other international figures came to Israel and declared all kinds of declarations. Part of them were totally hollow. But by the end of the day, it's about basing Israel as a regional superpower. And I don't say it has totally no meaning, but by the end of the day, Israel should ask itself also, are we really looking for those tyrants or those nationalist leaders as our only friends? I doubt it very much. I mean, Israel, which admires Donald Trump, it's not exactly something to be proud of.
And now with this President Trump's alleged, what he calls the deal of the century for Palestine and Israel, how does this factor in? Sudan has before declared war on Israel 2 times, actually. In coming away from that and now having talks where it says it's for the interest of the Sudanese themselves to, bolster relations with Israel. Where would it stand now on the Palestine stance?
I don't think it will change its declaration about the Palestinian side. The commitment to the Palestinians goes on, even though the Arab world and the Islamic world proved already that they do nothing for the Palestinians, and they are not ready to do anything for the Palestinians except of condemnations to Israel, but not much more. But Sudan is looking for those relationships, I guess, because of this belief, which is not totally unbased, that Israel can open the gates for Sudan in Washington. And that's the main goal for Sudan, because Sudan used to be considered as a state of terror, and the new regime wants to get to be accepted by the international community and above all in Washington. And they believe, maybe rightly so, that Israel can do for them the job.
It is interesting because while this meeting took place, there is an understanding from last year. There were several high-end meetings with Washington, with the Sudanese National Secret Service leader, Mr. Qasim, and it was understood that while Omar Bashir was not really the reliable person to be on the side of UAE and Saudi Arabia, because he was always pitching them against each other, now him out of power, it kind of sets the stage for what Washington was hoping to achieve all this time.
Look, we are not dealing, I'm not an expert for Sudan, but we are not dealing with a liberal Democrat as the new head of state. The former president was a criminal of war, but this does not mean that we are facing now a democratic choice. There is a lot of criticism, by the way, in Sudan about this step. Even the Sudanese government didn't approve this meeting with Netanyahu. And, by the end of the day, the real test is still ahead of us. Namely, if something will come out of this meeting, because there were so many meetings like this in the past, by the way, even with Sudan, decades ago, and finally, nothing comes out of it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gideon Levy, joining us there from Tel Aviv. Now we're joined by Dr. Marva Gabriel, a Sudanese political activist, speaking to us from London. Dr. Gibril, welcome to Newswire. This meeting that has taken place with Sudanese leader and Benjamin Netanyahu, this is coming at a time where Sudan has struggled to move forward after almost a year of protests, which have effectively toppled the 30-year regime of Omar al-Bashir. But there's a lot of criticism coming from around internationally as well as within Sudan. What is your take on this meeting?
Right. So first of all, thank you for having me. I think to start with, I have to say that Sudan is an independent and sovereign country with the right of relationship with any country all over the world that is built on mutual respect, benefit, and collaboration. However, I think this move was unilateral by General Burhan. He did not involve the cabinet, including the prime minister. And of course, it's a transitional period, very delicate, and at this time, the cabinet is the executive body who is got the authority to dictate the foreign policy in the absence of legislative council. And I think this reflects that there is a lot of challenges during this time of the transition. The military component of the Sovereign Council is still insisting in taking the front seat and not necessarily collaborating with the civil part or the civil government represented in the cabinet. Sudan is going through a lot of course, economic problems, and I think there is a lot of countries who've got interest to pressurize the people with loyalties, such as General Burhan and others, to take movements and not necessarily in agreement with the other with the cabinet.
Right. Well, you talk about that it's a very delicate period. It's a transitional time for the for Sudan. But the Sovereign Council of Sudan itself came out and said that it was not notified of the meeting. Besides, the foreign minister and the information minister had said the same thing. They had absolutely no idea. You said it was a unilateral move by General al-Burhan. But in terms of it, you talked about how it was in the interest of, it being a sovereign country and to look out for its economic and commercial interests. But in terms of a diplomatic shift, do you sense that now there will be a seismic diplomatic shift when it comes to Sudan's stance on the Palestine issue?
As I said, I don't think so. I repeat that we think that this is a unilateral movement from General Burhan, because there is a lot of pressure, I believe, internationally to take this move. If there is any future shift in the relationship between Sudan with Israel or any other countries, that should come through an elected government, that through the parliament, and that if that comes out of an elected democratic government, that let be it. But I think at the moment, any decision that is unilateral, I don't think that reflects what the Sudanese people want.
But what would the Sudanese people want when it comes to whether supporting the Palestinian cause? Because this comes right at the heels of President Trump having announced the deal of the century, as he calls it, and offer a proposal how to resolve the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
Well, I think there is a lot of Sudanese people came out and clearly said they disagree with it. What's it called, known as the deal of the century, has been rejected by the United Nations. Of course, we as the Sudanese people for a long time, we always stood by any country that suffered any oppression. We as Sudanese people suffered from oppression for a long time, and we will not agree to see it or support any oppressive either regimes or governments, whether to their own people or other people. However, I don't think Sudan in this delicate time is at a point where we would like to open these, venues of discussing. I would say that is coming as a priority. Where we would like to discuss, our relationship with Israel or other.
Dr. Gibril, stay with us here. Let's welcome Mr. Muslim Imran, a Palestinian activist and the president of Palestinian Cultural Organization, joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Imran, Palestinians have come out and reacted quite strongly to the Sudan-Israel normalization meeting, as it's being called, saying that it is a stab in the back for the Palestinians.
The Sudanese move to meet with Benjamin Netanyahu is bad, not only because of the timing, but also because of the move itself. The Palestinian political factions rejected this initiative to meet with the Israeli war criminal prime minister, and it was described by most Palestinian political factions as a stab in the back. But it was also rejected by most of the significant Sudanese political groups. I've been going through Sudanese media in the past day, and I can see that nationalist groups, Islamist groups, liberal groups have unanimously rejected this move by the military leader of Sudan. It is unfortunate that it comes at a time when the Palestinians are facing this American plot to finish off their struggle, what media has dubbed as the deal of the century. So as a Palestinian, I'm very disappointed to see that Sudan, which has historically stood by the Palestinian right, Sudan, which is famous for the Khartoum resolution of 1967, the three no's, is now under this current transitional leadership going for unnecessary political adventures.
But we just had Dr. Gibril talk about this was, as she's saying, a unilateral move by General Burhan. And having said that, and it's a very sensitive time for Sudan as it's transitioning out of a complete autocratic military regime into a democracy and a democratic setup with the transitional Sudanese council. But is there fear within the Palestinian circles that this might be a nail in the coffin when it comes to the kind of support Palestine desperately needs in the light of this proposal from President Trump?
You see, it's unfortunate that some in the Arab world believe in the myth that the best way to get the American support is through relations with Israel. This has not helped the Shah of Iran in the past. This has not helped Mubarak's regime. It has not helped in many examples. The US will just abandon dictators when it finds its interests at the stake. So this is a myth, of course. But having Israel reaching out to these Arab regimes is a sign of the strategic advantage that the Israeli government enjoys in the post-Arab Spring failure. When the Arab Spring ended up in military coups, failures here and there, Israel started to enjoy this strategic advantage and started to prey on these individual nations which are in need of economic support, in need of international aid, and it started to reach out to them through, of course, unfortunately, some mediators in the West or in the Arab world. I believe the Palestinian struggle is still, the solidarity with the Palestinian struggle is still on the rise. You look at what's happening in the European context, in Asia, in Africa. The Palestinian right is gaining more momentum, is gaining more support. It's just that some regimes which are desperate for survival are trying to, pay a price from their national commitment to the Palestinian struggle. I don't think the Sudanese people approve of what happened in Uganda. I don't think the military leader of Sudan represents the will of the Sudanese nation. Sudan has always been committed to the struggle of the Palestinians, and I believe if any real elections take place in the near future in Sudan, we will see a government which reflects and represents the will of its people, and it's certainly supporting the Palestinian struggle. When the struggle of the Palestinians is gaining momentum in Europe and in North America, it's very unfortunate to see our Arab brothers backing off due to external pressure or due to short-sighted calculations.
Okay, Mr. Muslim Imran there joining us. Well, I should reinstate here that General al-Burhan did come out and say that Khartoum still holds principled stance on Palestine issue. And with that, we've unfortunately run out of time. Dr. Marva Gabriel, thank you so much also for joining us in this conversation. That's it for now. We'll see you next week with a new episode of Newswire. More news and analysis from around the world.